Learning Unplugged.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Learning Unplugged. My name's Lucy and this is Tanya from Special Needs Jungle, and today we're going to talk about Special Needs Jungle, how they work and the support they can offer for parents, as well as SEND in education and in schools. So welcome, how are you?
Hi, thanks. Great, thank you.
So do you want to start off by kind of talking about your role and how Special Needs Jungle works and what you guys do?
Well, Special Needs Jungle, it's a voluntary part-time organisation. So, I mean, I've been doing it now for 15 years on a volunteer basis. It really just started because I noticed that having got my youngest statement, as it was back then, there were many other people in my local area who were not getting the support their children needed when their children's needs were, possibly more profound than my own. And so I decided to write down how I'd done it because my background is in journalism. And I'd approached it as a whole report, pulling in excerpts from reports that I had to use as evidence, sort of referencing them and thinking about all the areas that they might want to, to find a hole in it, and then making sure that I cut them all off. And I never had to go to tribunal because of it. So I just did that, and then it kind of escalated from there because I didn't really want to write about my children. I wanted to write about more interesting resources that other people could use. And I think that's possibly why it's been able to endure and grow, because I think there's only so much you can write about your own children, and then they grow up and don't want to be written about. So, and that just wasn't something I wanted to do. I wanted to really, use my time to help people.
So how do you think that kind of, so obviously you've been through that experience. Do you think that there is that kind of massive lack? Where do you think it lacks in education, and that kind of support that you can give to parents? Where do you think it specifically lacks in kind of societal structures?
Well, I mean, the problem stems in large part from lack of funding, and lack of intervention early enough. I mean, if you are born and you have a visible physical disability, then your needs are easier to recognize. Having said that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the support will follow and you're not in for a fight. But often if your child is autistic, that won't be recognized for a number of years, possibly, to year 1, year 2, or even later. And you then have to try to prove that your child has these needs. And the problem was that the teaching profession was not adequately prepared for that. It hasn't been trained. There still isn't enough training within ITT. And with the number of teaching assistants we've just seen that they've been cut left, right, and centre, there aren't the support within the classroom for the children who need it. And so when you don't have the support, when you don't feel included, you are less inclined to engage. And so then children end up getting excluded, which is why you see so many children in the criminal justice system who have special educational needs, most of them, because their needs haven't been spotted early enough.
What do you think then needs to happen in those schools to be able to identify early? Do you think there needs to be structures in place, or is it kind of responsibility between parents and teachers working together, or is it just kind of on the schools to have those systems in place? How do you think that needs, obviously, that lack of identifying
there are laws. There are laws in place to make sure that parents and their children get the support they need. The Children and Families Act, which is this year, it's 10 years old. But routinely in schools and in local authorities, it's breached, often through ignorance, and within local authorities, quite often it's to try to save money. But the government has a new improvement plan, having recognised these difficulties, and there is available lots of training from Whole School Send, for example, and the Universal Send Services Programme, that is free to access for schools. The issue is getting the word out there so that schools, I mean, I've been into several schools in the last few months because my grandson is heading for school in September. And every person I spoke to, and nobody had heard of the Whole School Send, Universal Send services. And it's there to be used. It's funded by government, and it's easy for anybody to learn more about Send. I mean, not just Universal Send services, there is support and training from all sorts of groups for either, for free or for a certain amount of money. So there is training there. You just have to want to actively take it up. And of course, it does help if your senior leadership of your school is on board and wants you to do this, because needs, particularly since the pandemic, needs are more and more prevalent within schools. And with the absenteeism growing as well, a lot of that is because of unmet need.
Could you just explain a little bit more about that act, the new support thing that's come out from the government, just in case anyone obviously hasn't heard of it?
It's a government initiative called the Send Improvement Plan, the Send Change Programme, and it is really trying to, in some way, improve the training within schools, improve the training across the sector. There are huge problems with it. It's a 3-year program. It's not expected to be finished until 2025. I mean, I can't really go into huge details because it will take the entire time of the podcast. But if you go to specialneedsjungle.com, you can find out all about it. We've written extensively about it. But really for schools, what they need to do is get the training that they need. And as I said, there isn't just the Whole School Send training, there is lots of other training around as well.
How do you think then that that obviously when schools do have that in place and they do have all the systems in place, how additionally from that can schools support those with SEN, and how can education have a real positive impact on someone's kind of participation and enjoyment of education really in general?
Well, every child is legally entitled to an education. But the problem is that so often within schools and within the structure and the way that schools are now run, children cannot access the same learning. Children with SEND cannot access the learning in the same way that neurotypical children can. And I really think that we need to have a look at education as a whole in the round, because clearly it is not working for a significant number of pupils. And what works for children who are neurodivergent, children who have disabilities, works for children who don't have disabilities. So it's really, apart from the fact it's unlawful just to aim at a small amount of children, you're writing off children's futures before they ever leave school. Too many children are out of school without the provision they need. The government is trying to stop schools from off-rolling, it's trying to stop children from, needlessly going into specialist provision, when with the right support at an earlier stage, they would never have had to go there. But it just seems to be that the message is taking a long time to get through, and schools and teachers are overwhelmed as it is with all the things that they have to do. And so many different, things that they are expected to meet. I mean, just look at, Ofsted inspections. If you're focused on Ofsted, you are not focused on children.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting point you've made there, because in my previous podcast, we spoke to one of our education consultants who used to work for Ofsted, and she was saying that the amount of pressure that kind of is put on Ofsted ratings and inspections is ridiculous for what it actually is, and that the ratings aren't the be all end all. So that kind of links into your point that that thing that they've obviously schools across the country, even like from your own experience of being at school, that there's so much importance put on those Ofsted ratings that other things are just left behind, and aren't given the proper support and time and effort that are put into it as they probably should.
Well, and the curriculum is narrowed to such an extent that the things that many neurodivergent children might have thrived at, there is no longer an emphasis on that. And, we cannot afford to write off children at this stage. I mean, there are so many talents that neurodivergent children, for example, have that need to be nurtured so they can play a full and productive role within society and have the life that they deserve.
Yeah, 100%. I fully agree with you there. Do you want to speak a little bit about Special Needs Jungle and kind of the support that you offer and the help and advice for parents that you have?
Well, I mean, we are a website. We are not a support website. We don't offer individual support because of the capacity that we have. Send politics, send resources, interesting things that are coming out. Research, we do quite a lot of. We have our own podcast. So it's really aimed at educating schools, parents, politicians, council officials, the whole range of people about what is the law, what you need to be doing to support children, and highlighting issues such as the safety valve agreements that are now being taken up by local authorities that is putting them in a indirect conflict with the law. Because they've got no money, so the government says, well, we'll give you some money, but you need to get your spending under control. Well, how do you do that if they must obey the law? It's never ending. It's a never ending strain of worry for parents who are increasingly having to go to the Senate tribunal to try to get the support that their children are entitled to. And you have to wonder why local authorities are still doing this, considering that they only prevail 1.7% of the time, which is basically never.
Yeah, I can imagine that kind of never-ending research and things that are coming out can be a lot. But I think that's really good that you've got that website, obviously offering that information rather than, I assume, parents kind of sit there and scroll through endless amount of research and information. But that you've
Well,
got.
I mean, we write specifically for people to be able to easily understand it on the first time. I mean, because we know that lots of people read it on their phones, for example. And if you're writing a sentence that has got lots of subclauses in it, you've forgotten what it was about by the time you get to the end of the scrolling of the very long sentence. So we try to avoid that. I mean, to say my background is in broadcast journalism, which is write as you speak. So that's what we do because it's the easiest way for somebody to understand it. We also do a lot of high-level advocacy with government and with kind of other sector bodies to put the parental view across. I mean, there are parent carer forums which are partner with the government, but we are the independent voice, and we support a lot of other organisations as well. And I think most independent parental advocates have probably learned their trade, I guess, from reading Special Needs Jungle.
Amazing. That sounds so good. So thank you so much for your kind of help and support and coming on the podcast. I just got my final question for you is for your final message for parents, carers, teachers to take away from the podcast.
The final message is know the law, take up any free training that's around, perfectly understand how difficult things are because, there's so much to do, so little time, and so many more children need you. But, you need to get the tools in hand that you need from training that you haven't been given before, because nobody thinks that teachers are there to not support children. Teachers do an extremely difficult job. And if they've got the tools to do it, then they can do that job so much better. So look up Whole School Send, look up Universal Send Services, look up any other organisation that can give you those tools. Speak to your Senkers, speak to your senior management team to ensure that they are on board with supporting every child in school, not just the ones that can sit down and listen and churn out, written work.
Amazing. I think that's a lovely way to end this podcast. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Learning Unplugged. Goodbye. Learning Unplugged.